Welcome to the Culinary Institute of America. My name is Bill Brewa. I'm a chef instructor here at the Greystone campus in California's Napa Valley. I've put together a comprehensive program to help you cook better food. Over the course of 24 lessons, I'm going to cook all manner of food, I'm going to evaluate it, and I'm going to try and offer insights to help you make sense of it all. Along the way, you'll learn foundational cooking techniques that will open up a broader world of food and cooking for your enjoyment. By the time the course is over, my goal is that you will be a better cook. More confident, more aware, and more likely to draw satisfaction from the craft of preparing food. So let's get started. All right, it's supper time, so let's get some food on the plate. Now, take a look at what I've got here. I've got a couple of veal cutlets, and they've both been cooked, but I wouldn't say they've both been cooked the same way. This one is pale, it's a little bit raw on the inside, and I would be worried about it. Here, there's some nice color. I'm going to serve this with potatoes, so let's put some potatoes on the plate. Uh-oh, these are like glue. Let me see what they taste like. Oh my God, there's lumps in here. Ooh, way too much salt. Well, let's move ahead. I just don't want to come off the spoon. Oh, man. All right. These look a little bit better. That's very nice. Now oh no, look at this broccoli. Green. Green is being kind, I would say. Well, let's move ahead. It's mush. It's just mush. This looks a little better. Let's see. Maybe tongs are a better way to go. Okay. I'm going to set this right there, and I'll set this over here. I think a little lemon would make a nice garnish, so we'll take care of that quickly. Salads. Almost forgot about salads. This one looks a little worse for the wear. It looks like it's been dressed for a long time, and if I tip it up, take a look at how much excess dressing there is on this. Compared to this one, which looks very nice. Lightly dressed, properly seasoned. Two very different meals. The ingredients are the same, but what is the difference? I would say the difference is understanding the importance of culinary technique. I would say the difference has to do with understanding ingredients and what you can and can't expect of them. And then finally, I would say it's important to understand the subtleties of taste and flavor. That's the big difference between this abomination and this meal that looks very tasty. Over the last 35 years that I've been cooking, the face of food has changed almost constantly. There's been Cajun, there's been French, there's been Nouvelle, there's been indulgent, healthy, ethnic, rustic. The list goes on and on. Against this backdrop, I asked myself, how do you get traction? How do you change direction fast enough? How do you decide what to focus on? I decided that maybe the best approach is to look for the calm center of the storm, the stable foundation on which all cooking is based regardless of the trends. That's really at the heart of what this program is about. So this program is based on three broad themes. The first is understanding that ingredients have to be of good quality, and that beyond that, you need to understand what you can and can't expect those ingredients to do. The second broad theme is cooking technique. There's just a few foundational techniques, and you need to put some effort into understanding those. And then finally, it's important that 3, you understand the interaction of taste and flavor really, really well. Let's start with that 3rd point first. I've gathered up a selection of ingredients. Let me show you what they are. I've got some melon, I've got some radicchio, there's a little piece of lime, and then here is sugar, salt, and a couple of jelly beans. This is what we're going to need for this next exercise. I've gathered it up, and the French would call this my mise en place. Everything I need so that I'm prepared. You might understand mise en place a little bit differently. If you were ever a Boy Scout or a Girl Scout, be prepared is the watchword. You can also think of it as just having your mess in place. I've gathered this up for myself, and I'm going to suggest that you do the same so that you can follow along. All right, think about taste for just a second. We have in our bodies, all of us, an opening, our mouth, and every bit of the food that we eat passes through that opening. It's artificially moist with saliva. Now, consider saliva for just a second. Not to be too graphic, but saliva makes your mouth moist. You can't taste unless the things that you're eating begin to dissolve. The moisture of saliva facilitates swallowing, so that's important. There's antimicrobial properties to saliva that protect us, and also there's enzymes in your saliva that begin to break down food, so that's important. So all the food we eat passes into our mouth, and what's curious is that our mouth has taste buds on our tongue and on our palate, and those taste buds have the ability to perceive the basic tastes. And here's what they are: sweet, sour, salty, bitter, and savory. 5 things. Now, scientists often try and add things to that list, things like putrid or metallic, but they always seem to return to the same 5 that I just gave you: sweet, sour, salty, bitter, and savory, and those seem to be the ones that everybody agrees upon. What you see on this tray represents those basic tastes. So salt and sugar are sweet and salty. There's acidity, there's bitterness in this radicchio, and there's sweetness even in this melon. The basic tastes we perceive on our tongue in an opening in our body through which all of our food passes. Now, if you stop for a second and consider that, it's a little bit too queer to be a coincidence. And it's not a coincidence at all. Those basic tastes are meaningful. Those basic tastes are markers for things that have assured our survival since mankind began walking the face of the earth. So think of it this way. Sweetness is a marker for ripeness in fruits and vegetables. When we taste sweet, which we're predisposed to like, we respond positively. When sweetness is available to us, like a bush of ripe raspberries, we're encouraged to top off our tank with carbohydrates that will fuel our existence. Salt is a marker for sodium, which we need to regulate our bodily functions, but more than that, it's a marker for micronutrients and minerals. So, sweet, salt, sour is a marker for underripeness or even spoilage. So, when we taste sour, a little warning flag goes up, and that's what keeps us from eating too many green apples and getting a bellyache. Sweet, salty, sour, bitter, as in radicchio, is a marker for alkaloids that in a plant-based diet anyways, oftentimes are poisonous. It's almost like it has a built-in warning device to tell us when we're eating foods that may be a little bit risky. And then finally, the savory flavor is maybe the most difficult to describe and understand. Savory, or what the Japanese call umami, is the flavor of protein that has begun to break down a little bit through enzyme activity or through long cooking. You will find this savory flavor in things like soy sauce or cured meats or aged cheese like Parmesan. Suffice it to say that that savory flavor is a flavor that we all seem to respond to, and we like it very much. So those are the basic tastes in a nutshell, markers for those things that are important to us. But there's other things that we taste, and you ask yourself, how do you understand them? For instance, a ripe melon has a wonderful floral perfume, but that floral perfume is more than just sweet. And a well-made cappuccino has a roasty flavor that is so much more than just a dark, bitter liquid. So we need to make a distinction here. And it's an interesting one. The distinction is between taste and flavor. Taste is these 5 things that you taste on your tongue, and flavor is those 5 things plus your ability to perceive aroma. If you want to put it in the form of an equation, taste plus aroma equals flavor. Now, just to drive this point home, I've got a little exercise that I want to share. We've got some jelly beans right here. And what I want to do is simply eat a jelly bean, but not before we plug our noses. Now, what that's going to do is take away our ability to smell. So, grab a jelly bean. It doesn't matter what flavor it is. In fact, it's better if you don't know. Plug your nose and eat it up. And along the way, try and decide what you notice about the flavor of the jelly bean. It's sweet. It has a characteristic texture. There's a little bit of acidity, but quite frankly, I don't know what flavor it is. Let your nose go, and suddenly it should become apparent what you're tasting. Mine was buttered popcorn. I don't know what yours is. Here's 3 things that I think you should notice. The first is that when you let your nose go, the flavor becomes apparent. The second is that when you let your nose go, the distinction between taste and flavor likewise becomes apparent. And then third, those 2 things in tandem, taste and aroma, equal the flavor that you perceive. Now, there's a famous French food writer who lived in the 1800s, a guy named Brillat-Savarin, and he explained it this way. He said that your mouth is like a laboratory, and that laboratory has the ability to perceive the basic tastes. Coming off that laboratory is a chimney, which is your sniffer. And your nose has the ability to perceive all things aromatic, and those 2 things in tandem with one another give you the ability to perceive and enjoy flavor. One of the great things about recognizing the distinction between taste and flavor is that when you're in the kitchen seasoning food, most of your challenges will have to do with the interaction of tastes with one another. Not so much about esoteric herbs and spices, but it just boils down to sweet, sour, salty, bitter, and savory. This next little exercise that we're going to walk through will help you understand that interaction really, really well. As we do this, take small bites. You don't need to eat a lot of any of this food. I want to revisit much of this food again and again, so small bites are the order of the day. Let's begin with a quick bite of melon. Now, obviously melon is sweet. There's a wonderful floral aroma that tells me something about this melon, that it is ripe. That floral quality, that muskiness is really an indicator of ripeness, as is the level of sugar, as is its texture, and the juiciness. You know, it's heavy and moist with juice. I said earlier that sweetness is a marker for ripeness, which I believe, but I think it's very, very subtle. I don't think, for instance, you could convince yourself that this is a riper melon simply by putting sugar on it, but let's try it. Take this melon and dip it into sugar and then taste it again. That excess sugar may fool you for just a second, but when you start to recognize that the texture and the aroma aren't equal to that level of sugar, then you recognize that something is amiss. Now, as we're eating melon here, I would ask, how many of you are melon salters? I'm a melon salter myself. My grandmother before me was a melon salter. Usually about a third of the people out there love to salt melon. So if you take and put a little bit of salt on melon, not a lot, just enough to give it a little seasoning. It might surprise you that you have a much fuller taste experience. It's more satisfying for just a few grains of salt, and it might even surprise you that it's actually tasting a little sweeter. It lingers longer on your palate. For some reason, it seems more enjoyable. Imagine now that you are traveling to Mexico on vacation, and in the morning there is melon laid out for breakfast, and side by each with the melon is lime juice. What would happen if we seasoned this melon with a few drops of lime juice? So, doesn't take very much. Again, a fuller experience. The sweetness of the melon is tempered by the acidity of this lime juice. But more than that, the lime is actually a ripe fruit. There's a tremendous aroma to lime that is the result of this fruit having ripened. And that aroma mingles with the muskiness of this melon, and it seems somehow riper for having a fuller aroma. Let's put the melon down for just a second. Just leave that alone. And I'm going to do something mean. I'm going to ask you to taste radicchio all on its own. Now remember what I said earlier. The bitter flavor is almost like a warning device to tell us that we're eating something that's risky. And if we swallow it, it may do us some harm because there's a chance that it will be poisonous. It's surprising that you taste bitterness most acutely at the very back of your palate, almost as if Mother Nature is saying, one last chance to notice that this food is bitter, and then if you swallow it, it's your fault that you poisoned yourself. Here's what we're going to do. Take a little piece of this radicchio and just chew it up. Our ability to perceive bitterness is very, very acute. Right now, my palate is sort of overwhelmed by bitterness. And as I said, I taste it most acutely at the back of my tongue. It's not particularly pleasant. And if I were to ask you what a good strategy for dealing with bitterness in food might be, you might say, well, I like bitter coffee with sugar in it, so let's see what happens if we put a little bit of sugar on this radicchio. Initially, I noticed the sweetness. But side by side with that sweetness, the bitterness actually seems more intense. So initially sweet, 2 thumbs up, and then as that sweetness passes off of my palate, the bitterness is back, and compared to the sweetness, it's more aggressive than ever it was. In coffee, I think it works. When you have a foodstuff that has an inherent sweetness already, then sweetness is maybe a good strategy, but there's no sweetness in this radicchio. So let's move from sugar to salt. Let's instead put a little bit of salt on this radicchio. And now suddenly, there's a resonance. The bitterness is still there, but there's something about seasoning it with salt that makes the flavor fuller and less aggressive. I think we're on the right track. At least I hope that we are. Next, I would like you to take a drop or two of lime and put that on this radicchio, and we'll taste it with just acidity. One way to understand that would be, here's a salad dressing in the form of lime juice that I put on this bitter green. And if you're like me, it actually tastes pretty good. The acidity is assertive enough to stand up to the bitterness and push it down a little bit. It's as if when you eat the radicchio all on its own, it's the star. And now, side by side with acidity, it becomes sort of one of the supporting players in a flavor experience. What I want to do is kind of tie this all together. We learned a little bit about flavor interaction, but I want you to imagine for a second that you and I are going to open a restaurant, and on that restaurant's menu will be a salad that has bitter greens and melon. The dressing will be made with lime juice, and we'll take everything that we've learned about seasoning and bring it to bear on this dish. So what I'm going to suggest is a small little bite of melon, a piece of radicchio. I want you to dress it with lime juice, and I'm thinking, 4 or 5 drops, something like that. Season it with salt. The flavors are big, so the salt has to be assertive. And then let's see if we can punch up some of the sweetness of that melon with sugar. I suggested that maybe you get a little bit of cayenne. And I like things spicy. I've lived in California for more than 30 years. If you want to take just a few grains of cayenne and put that on your melon salad, I think that's entirely appropriate. Don't overdo it because we don't want to blow your palate away. So gather this all up and in one mouthful, chew it up and close your eyes and evaluate the flavor experience. Here we go. The first thing I would have you notice is that the experience is very, very full. There's a lot going on there. I have the bitter greens, I have the sweetness of the melon, I have the aroma of the melon and the lime, the sweetness, the saltiness, that little bit of heat or irritation that comes from cayenne. So it's a full experience, and that's not surprising because what we've done is we have jangled all of our taste receptors. Those for sweet, sour, salty, bitter have all been brought to life because of what we just ate. But beyond just a full experience, if you're like me, I think you've got another realization, and that is that if you had it to do again, you now know that you could change these things almost infinitely and come up with a flavor experience that suits your taste. This idea of tasting, evaluating, and then adjusting is incredibly important. And that skill is one that you will do in the kitchen again and again and again. So as I tasted through here, I thought, oof, I wish I'd put just a couple more drops of lime on there. And to accompany that lime, a couple of more grains of salt would really punch up the flavor in a nice way. I hit it on the sugar. The cayenne was just right. Those subtleties to the interaction of taste and flavor are incredibly important for what we're going to be doing going forward in the kitchen. Don't waste any time wishing you were a better taster. Put your effort into becoming a better taster through focused attention and curiosity every time you prepare, season, and eat food. This skill set is really foundational. It'll serve you well every day of your life, and the payoff is more enjoyment and pleasure every time you sit down to eat.